One courageous woman managed to confront the man responsible for her daughter's murder. One radical activist found himself deeply shaken by her act of forgiveness. This is their story of how grace blossomed in the worst of times. On the night of December 30th, 1993, a young woman named Ginn Fourie was chatting with friends at the Heidelberg Cafe in Cape Town, South Africa. Suddenly, without warning, a hail of AK-47 gunfire tore through the restaurant. 3 men from the Pan-Africanist Congress had been ordered to make whites suffer as blacks had suffered under apartheid. Lindy's mother, Ginn Fourie, a university professor of physiotherapy, received the terrible news.
Horrendous. We actually only got to hear the next day. It was around midnight. The 3 young men had first thrown a grenade into the restaurant, and when that didn't detonate, they ran in and started firing randomly, and Lindy was killed with 4 altogether.
And you said that later you got home and there were people in your driveway and you received the news, and then you had to go and identify your daughter at the morgue. Unimaginable for horror.
Fortunately, the shock is so great that it's almost like you're watching a movie.
It's numbing.
It just can't be real.
Your daughter, a victim of random violence, a victim of a terrorist act that would become known as the Heidelberg Massacre. It's hard for most of us to imagine the trauma of a loss like that.
She was a very dear friend. We often went hiking in her vacations in the mountains, 4 or 5-day hikes. We loved going to the movies together and analyzing the movies afterwards. And we spent a lot of time together. So she was 23, a beautiful, tall young lady who was just finishing a degree in civil engineering at the University of Cape Town. And she was a very people person.
One of the terrible ironies about Lindy's murder was that she had tremendous sympathy for the plight of blacks. This young woman understood how cruelly they'd been repressed, and she wanted to help better their lives.
Her vision, her dream, was to use her civil engineering to bring a better life for the people who had been disadvantaged. In her vacations, she worked at one of the big engineering firms in Cape Town, and during lunch hours, the black men used to come and tell her about the hopelessness and despair that they felt, because as labourers there was absolutely no chance of any improvement. And they lived in shacks and had nothing more to offer. And she used to come home in the evenings and tell me about the sad stories of their lives and weep.
Ginn Fourie had to try to go on. She found support among the members of the Adventist church where her faith had been nurtured.
One just gets on with your life, and lots of sadness. The saddest times were anniversaries. Any time that the family would normally be together, there was always the empty chair.
How was this grieving mother going to hold on to her faith? How was she going to believe that a God of love still cared and still ruled? As it turned out, Ginn Fourie experienced a moment of truth at the trial of the 3 gunmen. At first, there was only the horror of having to watch the police video showing Lindy's body lying twisted and bloody on the floor. But then something happened as she looked at the faces of the accused.
Although I was very familiar with Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King's passive resistance to violence, I didn't know in the context of Lindy's death what it would mean to absorb violence. But I think I gained some insight when, in the Supreme Court in Cape Town a year later, I was confronted by my own feelings when I looked at the 3 young men who were on trial and felt empathy, felt actually sorry for them because of the dilemma they were in at that point. The political activists who had prompted their activity were nowhere to be seen, and so they had no support. They had some family sitting in the gallery, but it was very tense, and they weren't allowed to speak to any of them.
Did you send over a note to them? How did you get word to them that you had forgiven them, and what was that like?
I asked the translator, who was speaking in Xhosa, the language of the young men, to tell them that if they were or felt guilty, that I forgive them. And they beckoned to me from the dock where they were sitting to come and speak to them. And so the judge hadn't come into the court yet. So I went over and spoke to them.
And what was their response to you?
They said that they thanked me for my message, but said they didn't know why they were there. And when I suggested that they go into the witness stand and tell the judge that they didn't know why they were there, their faces turned stoic and they turned the other way. The judge came in and that was the end.
And they ended up being sentenced to 25 years each. Remarkably, forgiveness burst in where there should have only been hatred and a desire for vengeance. As Ginn put it, I had the role model before me of Christ forgiving his murderers. But Ginn also told me that forgiveness is a process, not a single event. And sometime after the trial, Ginn had another opportunity to talk to the perpetrators of the Heidelberg Massacre. The South African government had set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was an attempt to interrupt the cycle of violence and racial hatred that had plagued South Africa for so long. Victims had a chance to confront those who'd killed their loved ones, and murderers a chance to seek reconciliation.
Well, we were given the opportunity to speak at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearing, and I told the young men, whose names are Madasi, Mabala and Gumfa, who Lindy was, and that they'd actually done their cause inestimable damage by killing her. And they asked to speak to me after the hearing, privately, which happened. But there were warders present, and the warders were trying to get us to finish the meeting because they wanted to take them back to distant prisons. And they thanked me for the message of peace and hope that they said they would take with them to their communities and to their graves, whether they got amnesty or not. And I found that very moving.
And did they eventually get amnesty?
They did. In July 1998, they were freed. But unfortunately, there was no counselling arranged for them. I had been to speak to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to ask if counselling for amnesty seekers had been part of the commission.
Now, this is what really impressed me about Ginn's story. The people who killed her daughter are given amnesty, but instead of working to overturn that verdict, she's working to make sure they receive counseling. Still, that wasn't the end of Ginn's journey through forgiveness. There was one more step she decided to take. She actually confronted the man who had ordered the Heidelberg Massacre.
His name became known soon after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. We had wanted the amnesty seekers to reveal who their high command had been, and they were reticent to do that. But soon after the hearing, it became known that Letlapa Mpahlele was in the position of high command and had given the orders, both for the St. James Church massacre in July of 1993 and the Heidelberg massacre in December of 93. And I just heard a radio interview with him, and so what I heard was that he was having a book review at the waterfront in Cape Town, a book launch, and that it was that very day.
And the book was called A Child of the Soil.
Correct.
And it was his autobiography, and you went there and you confronted him. How did you let him know who you were and that you were Lindy's mother?
I said that what my name is, Ginn Fourie, and that Lindy was killed at the Heidelberg.
As she identified herself, who she was, and how she was related to someone who had died as a result of my orders, I was shaken. Something inside me was moved. And when we saw the faces behind the grief, the faces behind the pain, that we realized the gravity, and we questioned our decision, but of course it was too late.
He came straight from the podium and asked me to meet with him. And in that moment, I saw the remorse in his eyes and in his body language. And he actually said he was very sorry for my pain.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to court trials of my case, accused of this and that. And when the charges were withdrawn, nothing inside me was moved. Nothing, the depths, and the foundation of my being were not shaken. But it took one sentence from Ginn Fourie to say, I forgive you for all what you have done. I forgive you for killing my daughter, my only daughter, Lindy. Then something in me was moved, and not only moved, but something was restored in me, and that something is humanity.
What's especially remarkable is that Ginn and Letlapa began a friendship that went far beyond the healing in their two lives.
Well, he invited me to his homecoming ceremony in his remote village of Manaleng in the Limpopo province in South Africa, the northern part of South Africa. And he asked me later if I would speak at his homecoming ceremony, which I did. And it was a most amazing ceremony. The purpose of a homecoming ceremony is to debrief the soldier and help him to put away his arms and his uniform and become an ordinary citizen. Mm-hmm. There must have been about 1,500 people, of whom only 8 were white. And what I said to that meeting was that I'd consulted my ancestors, and they were deeply sorry for the shame and humiliation that they had brought to black people in South Africa through slavery, colonialization, and then the dreaded apartheid. And I made the link between shame and humiliation and the resulting violence, because those are the dark emotions that James Gilligan, one of your authors on violence in Massachusetts, has linked very closely in his experience with serial killers, really bad murderers. And in every one of their backgrounds is the shame and humiliation, and often in the name of God. And it's that combination that results in violence. And so I made that link at the meeting. And the response was enormous. One young man came to me afterwards and said, please, would I have a picture taken with him? Because the people in his village will not believe him, that there's a white woman who understands so well.
The speaker of the day, or someone who had the most eminent presence, was Ginn Fourie. And of course, when she stood up to speak, she moved, the whole crowd of people, and some people broke into tears because what she said was so powerful. It is a moving experience, and with that, really, you see how cruel the war is. Her understanding is very instructive and educative on our part, that violence may not be the best answer to the problems.
Ginn's act of forgiveness had made a remarkable impact on a man who'd felt compelled to fight oppression with terror.
If I could say one thing to Lindy, that thing would be, I am sorry. Really, each of us in this world has possessions. And of course, some possessions are replaceable. Some possessions can be substituted. But now, if one takes life from another person, that it is not possible to return it. And hence, if I were to say one thing, I would say I'm sorry. More so that I've learned a lot from her mother, the kind of person Lindy was, and I think she did not deserve to die.
Letlapa needed a way to express what Ginn now meant to him, so he composed a poem for her. When I heard Ginn read it to an assembly of students, well, you could hear a pin drop.
To Lindy Fourie, forgive our deafness. Our ears are modulated to hear voices of the dead, counseling us from your tomb. We leap at your still commands. Hands that unleashed thunder on you 9 summers ago, this summer tremble before your throne. In the twilight of our age, the angry soldier breezed from the bush, tried in vain to hate, succeeded in hurting. Today, the guerrilla is foraging the bush for herbs to heal hearts
swollen with grief. Show us how to muffle the roar of our rage, how to dam the rivers of our tears, how to share laughter and
land and laughter. Forgive our idiocy. Our souls are tuned to heed prophecy by the graveside of the prophet whose blood we spilt, whose teachings we ridiculed while he walked among us.
And didn't Letlapa's parents come out and greet you, and his mother
Oh,
embraced
yes.
you?
Yes, they are
And
great friends now.
And you stayed in their home?
I stayed in their home and experienced the material poverty of the village without any spiritual poverty. And as a result of that, on my return journey to Cape Town, I started writing in my diary a mission statement and vision and objectives for what I thought of as a No Fat Cats Foundation.
No Fat Cats. That's what you called it. What happened when you told Letlapa the name of the foundation?
When I met with him the next week and asked him if he would be interested in joining me in this foundation, he was very enthusiastic. Yes, definitely. And he looked out the window and he said, but no fat cats? That's not the name. It's a good concept, but the name should be Lindy Fourie Foundation.
So that when people ask, who is Lindy Fourie, her story can be told and retold. And in that way, we'll be keeping alive the memory of Lindy and those people who died together with her.
Ginn, tell us about some of the objectives of the Lindy Fourie Foundation. What are your goals? What do you hope to accomplish with Letlapa?
You know, Connie, we started out just wanting to empower the people of Selateng, the village that he comes from, and then possibly move out further afield from there. But it's become much bigger now in that the research that I've been doing has uncovered enormous anger, and Letlapa refers to it in his poem about the land and not sharing the land with the indigenous people to whom the land belonged until the settlers came. And because of this anger, they are very angry with the government as well, because they consider they've given the best years of their lives, the young ex-combatants. And now they're nobody and nothing and have no skills to really proceed. So a further aim of the Lindy Fourie Foundation would be to help healing to take place. And at the homecoming ceremony, I was called a Mother of Africa. That's and given a very special name, Peladi.
Which means?
It doesn't have a meaning, but it's a name of honor, so that when I go to the village, they don't have to go through all of the rigmarole of how are you and etc. It's just Peladi. They don't even say hello, Ginn. They just say that name, and that indicates intimacy.
And Lidlapa has called you, he said that you are 1 in a million, and probably 1 in a billion. When you talk with Ginn Fourie, one question keeps haunting you. How did she do it? How did this woman move from tragedy to such a solid faith? How did she manage to spread love in a place of such violence and hatred? The first clue, I think, comes from something that happened during Lindy's funeral. Ginn reached up to God through her sorrow in a very special way. This is the prayer she read by her daughter's coffin.
Gracious Parent, Great Spirit, you gave your only Son to bring healing for every soul on earth. Thank you for our only daughter. May healing come through her death to each person she touched, especially those who murdered her. Lindy had no choice, no time, but your Son said it for her. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they do. We gave her bed and board and some love. You gave her forgiveness and a love that was honest, pure, selfless, color and gender free. Dear God, she taught me well of you, able to listen, able to hear. That was her life that you gave her. Her death was swift and painless, thank goodness. My heart is broken, the hole is bottomless. It will not end, but you know all about it. Thank you for the arms, the lips, the heartbeats of family and friends to carry us. I trust you with my precious Lindy. This planet is a dangerous place to live. I know that you will come soon to fetch us. I wish it were today, but I will wait for your time.
Those are powerful words. You know what struck me about Ginn's ordeal, and especially about her encounters with those who'd murdered her daughter, was that there was always a stronger image in her mind and in her heart. Something stronger than the faces of hatred, something stronger than the horrifying images on the floor of that restaurant. It was the picture of a God who forgives. I caught that in something she said about her testimony at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearing.
I confirmed that I supported amnesty for the young men because I had forgiven them. And the reason I was able to do that was that my high command had demonstrated to me how to forgive as he lay dying on a rugged cross.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful image. None of us can imagine the horror you and your family have gone through in losing an only daughter. But how do you keep the faith during tough times? Why is it important? How did you hang on to God?
I think it depends a huge amount on one's picture of God. And through dialogue with my brother Ian Hartley, the picture of God that emerged from those dialogues is one of a loving, caring God who is with us in tragedy.
My sense of Ginn Fourie is that this is a woman who has absorbed a lot of love. That's the bottom line for her. And her picture of God's love won out over all the horror around her. It survived over the worst of circumstances. The murder of your child? I don't know how I would cope with something like that. But Ginn showed me a beautiful way of keeping the faith that I will never forget.
Ginn says, even on her side, by forgiving, she feels that she has relieved herself of the burden of hating. Now, she says she had an option of hating, hating us, wishing us ill, etc. But by forgiving us, she feels that she has taken off that burden of hating, and by discovering and restoring our humanity and actually working together with her, coming to our home, and we retaining, her visit to her home, something has been restored, and something more important and something greater and nobler than hating has taken place by forgiving. Of all gifts, really forgiveness, I think, is the most enduring and the greatest gift that a human being can give to another human being. And in my case, I got that gift from Ginn Fourie. And of course, the one who gives is always loftier and nobler than the one who receives.
And I think that grace is sufficient for all of us.
Yes. Yes, it is. Thank you. Ginn, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for being a remarkable woman of faith and for teaching us a little more how to keep the faith.
Thank you, Connie.
For more information about keeping the faith, visit www.keepingthefaith.tv.